A red carpet welcome to America for a man accused of war crimes. US President Donald Trump applauding his Russian counterpart. The two world powers greeting one another like old friends.
We didn't see the kind of ceasefire agreement or outline of any sort of deal that a lot of people, including President Trump, expected may occur.
After weeks when Trump's tariff bluff with Canada, the EU, and over 60 countries dominated the headlines, attention briefly shifted to Anchorage. The summit between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin was set up as a global moment. Putin opened his short press conference with a reminder of Russian-American history and the old bonds of World War II. For Moscow, it was a chance to highlight shared victories. For Trump, it was an opportunity to present himself as the leader who could deliver peace in Ukraine. Yet behind the symbolism, the meeting revealed the wide gap between appearance and results.
I think Trump did not lose, but Putin clearly won.
So he went for a ceasefire. He leaves with nothing. Putin got a flyover, a red carpet, a lot of handshakes, and a lot of great state TV coverage back home. I think it's even deeper.
In practice, the summit delivered no ceasefire, no sanctions, and no concrete agreement. Putin returned to Moscow with exactly what he sought: visibility on the world stage, the image of standing alongside an American president, and no new costs for his war. Trump left Anchorage with little more than vague promises of more meetings and the hint that the conflict might be settled by freezing the front lines in exchange for territorial concessions. Analysts and journalists close to the talks noted that this gave Putin room to continue the war while avoiding penalties. US media, meanwhile, focused on Trump's tired appearance and the lack of clarity in his message. Instead of setting red lines, he praised the relationship as fantastic. Critics argue that this allowed Putin to walk away as the clear winner.
Nobody here wants to see a repeat of the humiliating scene a few months ago when Vladimir Zelensky was berated by Donald Trump in that Oval Office. And so Zelensky will be flying there armed with European support, allies by his side on the guest list.
The response in Europe was swift. Determined not to let Alaska become a turning point for Russia, European leaders launched what some described as a full-court press. Zelensky arrived in Washington backed by the NATO Secretary General, the President of the European Commission, and the leaders of the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy, and Finland. Their agenda was unmistakable: firm security guarantees for Ukraine, modeled on NATO's Article 5, and a rejection of any plan that forces Kyiv to give up land. The European Commission president stressed that borders cannot be changed by force and that Ukraine must remain capable of defending itself. By arriving together, these leaders turned Zelensky from an isolated guest into the centerpiece of a united transatlantic front.
Prime Minister Mark Carney is praising what he calls an openness by the U.S. to provide security guarantees to Ukraine. In a statement, Carney said robust and credible security guarantees are essential to any just and lasting peace between Russia and Ukraine.
Canada added its voice through Prime Minister Mark Carney. He welcomed signs that the United States might be more open to security guarantees for Ukraine, stressing that such guarantees are essential for any just and lasting peace. His tone was careful. He avoided direct clashes with Trump and did not overstate the outcome, but his words echoed Canada's broader position that peace cannot be built on shaky compromises. While Ukraine and European leaders pressed for stronger commitments, Carney framed his intervention as a reminder that credible security guarantees must be at the center of any settlement.
I've always had a fantastic relationship with President Putin, with Vladimir. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
The Alaska summit showed how political theater can overshadow the hard realities of war. Putin walked away with powerful images and no new sanctions. Trump left without the breakthrough he wanted. Europe closed ranks behind Zelensky, while Canada stressed the need for reliable guarantees over rushed bargains. The parallel is clear. Trump's tariff tensions with Canada, the EU, and over 60 countries have already shown how quick fixes in trade create lasting costs. Anchorage now points to the same challenge in security. The real test ahead is whether Trump can move beyond short-term tactics to secure peace without sacrificing Ukraine's sovereignty or the trust of America's allies.
This is the effect of Donald Trump's tariffs. I'm going to show you a pretty bad one right here. This is on child's clothes. You can see they ripped off the bottom. That's what it's supposed to look like, $6.98. These are up to $10.98 now. That is a $4 increase.
In the early hours of August 7th, 2025, President Donald Trump activated his long-planned global tariff package. Duties of 10 to 50% on more than 90 countries, pushing the average U.S. import rate above 17%, the highest since the Great Depression. Canada was already on his list. Since August 1st, a higher tariff tier has applied to Canadian goods outside USMCA rules, part of a broader offensive that also targeted the European Union, India, Brazil, and Mexico. The intent was straightforward: hit multiple partners at once and extract faster concessions. But as the weeks unfolded, the strain began to boomerang back on the U.S. economy.
Prices are starting to rise for American consumers as President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs on nearly all imported goods are kicking in.
The price shock came from the package as a whole, not just Canada. According to Cox Automotive, new car prices are projected to climb 4 to 8% in 2025. Even Ford, with most of its assembly in the U.S., has paid about $1 billion in tariff costs and raised prices on Mexico-built models. Yale's Budget Lab estimates shoe prices will surge 40% and clothing 38% as tariffs on Vietnam and India squeeze global sportswear brands. Procter & Gamble confirmed in late July it will raise household product prices by single-digit percentages after months of trying to hold the line. Imported staples, olive oil from Europe, Brazilian coffee now under a 50% tariff, and aluminum from Mexico for beer cans are all climbing. Some importers initially absorbed the cost, but retailers warn thin margins won't hold. Walmart has signaled that higher shelf prices are inevitable, while smaller stores feel the pinch sooner. Inflationary pressure is now combining with Trump's push for lower interest rates, raising concerns over a double whammy on consumer prices.
With the looming threat of U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs, a Buy Canadian movement has picked up across the country. You may have noticed it when you go into grocery stores or supply shops, a tag that tells you if the product you're about to pick up is made in Canada.
As the global tariff wave began to push up costs in the United States, Ottawa seized the moment to strengthen its negotiating position. Prime Minister Mark Carney held firm on Canada's 25% retaliatory tariffs, targeting U.S. goods tied to influential industries. By keeping that pressure in place, Canada ensured the discomfort was registered not just by corporations, but by lawmakers in Washington.
And I still have to get a can of Campbell's soup that's putting that Canadian flag on, that's not being manufactured here, misleading the people. They're going to rip that label off and encourage people to buy made in Ontario, made in Canada soup.
At home, Ontario Premier Doug Ford amplified the strategy. His push for clear origin labeling and his public criticism of companies outsourcing production showed a united political front committed to protecting domestic industry. These moves weren't only about internal policy. They signaled to the U.S. that Canada's leadership was aligned and prepared to act in defense of its interests. Meanwhile, Canada accelerated trade diversification toward the EU, UK, and Mexico, reducing dependence on the U.S. market precisely as American import costs were climbing. The combination of targeted tariffs, domestic unity, and new trade channels turned a defensive posture into a calculated offense, allowing Canada to press its advantage while Trump faced growing economic pressure at home. Trump began August with an aggressive trade play, expecting quick compliance from partners. Instead, his global tariff web has spread economic pressure across U.S. industries and households, while Canada has held steady. By maintaining its countermeasures, reinforcing domestic production, and diversifying export markets, Ottawa has positioned itself as an active player, not a subordinate. The contest is now a measured standoff. The U.S. wields market scale, Canada holds supply chain and resource leverage. The final outcome remains uncertain, but one fact is clear. The tariffs designed to force Canada into retreat have instead created a more balanced battlefield where Ottawa can negotiate from strength and shape the terms of the next move.
Well, let's talk about this extended truce between China and the U.S. that was announced by President Trump.
I think that President Trump didn't have much of a choice because
China is in a very strong position to negotiate.
If China is operating from a power position, what about Canada?
In early August, two very different trade stories unfolded. In Washington, President Donald Trump announced a 90-day extension of the U.S.-China tariff truce. The White House framed it as a way to buy time and secure new commitments on U.S. chip exports and energy sales to China. Beijing, for its part, still controls most of the world's rare earth production and had just opened new zero-tariff access to dozens of African nations, strengthening its own negotiating position. But while Trump eased tensions with Beijing, the pressure on Canada stayed intact. Since August 1st, Canadian goods that don't qualify under USMCA rules have faced a 35% U.S. tariff, a rate raised from 25% in late July. There's no sign yet of a reduction, and Ottawa has received none of the temporary tariff delays that Mexico secured. The contrast is clear. One neighbor gets more time, the other gets more heat. For Trump, tariffs are more than an economic measure. They're a negotiating lever. The official justifications change frequently. Border security, fentanyl, dairy, even unrelated sectors like banking. With China, the 90-day truce was tied to specific exchanges. More U.S. chips from companies like NVIDIA, more American ethane for Chinese industry, and the understanding that Beijing's dominance in critical minerals gives it leverage. With Canada, the calculus is different. Keeping tariffs high maintains pressure ahead of a possible early USMCA reopening. It limits Ottawa's breathing space and forces Canadian negotiators to consider concessions to avoid further escalation. Trump's track record with other partners, from the EU's capped 15% rates to Switzerland's 39%, shows how he uses these numbers to anchor hard bargaining.
We are in a difficult position with the U.S. We're subject now to a tariff of 35%. We have to put in place a very elaborate plan to diversify our exports.
Prime Minister Mark Carney has avoided rushing into retaliatory moves, opting for a mix of steady dialogue and visible domestic reinforcement. In July, Ottawa announced over $1 billion Canadian in measures to protect the steel sector, including procurement rules favoring Canadian steel and aluminum, funding to reskill affected workers, and infrastructure investments to stabilize supply. These supports aim to absorb some of the market shock from the U.S. tariffs, which since June 4th have been as high as 50% on U.S. imports of Canadian steel and aluminum. According to the Canadian Steel Producers Association, about 6 to 6.5 million tons of steel lost access to the U.S. market after those measures. The domestic plan opens a 2 to 2.5 million ton opportunity for Canadian producers, a first step in restructuring away from over-reliance on U.S. buyers.
Europe is an obvious partner. It has a very mature economy. They're interested in all kinds of goods that we can export.
But we will also work with new partners or partners that we have not developed commercial relationship as deep as the U.S. one, including, of course, with Europe and key Asian countries.
At the same time, Canada is deepening ties with the European Union. Under the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, most goods already trade tariff-free, but new talks are focusing on aligning industrial strategy in sectors like steel, aluminum, and critical minerals. With a market of roughly 450 million people and stable regulatory rules, the EU offers a reliable alternative that reduces Canada's exposure to U.S. tariff swings. Trump's strategy is built on speed. Apply tariffs, create immediate discomfort, and extract concessions quickly. Carney's counter is built on endurance. Reinforce domestic industries, diversify export markets, and keep diplomatic channels open until the balance shifts. While over 85% of Canada's exports to the U.S. still move tariff-free under USMCA rules, Ottawa holds cards that are hard for Washington to replace: strategic minerals, integrated auto supply chains, and substantial oil and gas flows. By protecting these advantages and expanding reliable partnerships like the EU, Canada aims to make sure it can withstand U.S. tariff pressure longer than Trump expects. The fight isn't just over rates and exemptions. It's about shaping the trade rules that will define North America for the next decade. And on that front, Canada is determined not to play from behind.